Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Behavior Blueprint podcast. This month, the month of July, we are talking about emotional regulation. And what I am not going to do is be one more like quote unquote parenting expert being like, you have to be a regulated parent. Like, yeah, we know that. Okay. How do we get there? What does that actually look like? What is the replacement behavior? And how do we also teach our kids that like sometimes you do lose your cool, and what does that look like? I have many examples for you of me losing my cool. So we are going to get into it. We are going to talk about how to maintain emotional regulation, how to teach emotional regulation. And we're going to look at all of this from a behavioral lens. So if you are looking for a podcast to tell you to take deep breaths and that like you are the adult and you should just be able to do it, this is not your one-stop shop. If you are looking for someone who's going to tell you that they are like so calm and they do this all the time and let me teach you, I am not your girl. We are going to talk about how I screw up and what we can do differently, because I think that's real life. So if you're not into that, I'm not the expert for you. And now let's put experts in quotes. I hate that. Okay, so let's get into it. The goal of emotional regulation is to look for patterns. We talk about this in every single episode. We need to look for patterns and analyze the function of our behavior. So let's go.
Hi, I'm Mandy, the family behaviorist, and these are 3 of my favorite little humans.
Hi, I'm on this podcast. Let's do this.
Let's do this. This is the Behavior Blueprint, where we can figure out why kids do what they do.
Is that why parents yell sometimes?
Sometimes, because parenthood is messy, behavior is complex, but with the right blueprint, we can figure it out together.
Yeah!
Okay, so as I said a minute ago, when we talk about our behavior in this case, right, our emotional regulation, our outburst, our tantrum, whatever that looks like, we want to look at the same thing we look at with our children's behavior. What is the antecedent? What is happening before the behavior? What does the behavior look like? And what is the consequence? Again, consequence doesn't mean like, I don't know, my kid cried or whatever. Consequence means what happened after the behavior occurred. An important thing for us is to look at our triggers. Same thing for our kids. Once we determine those triggers, the goal also isn't to avoid them at all costs, because that is not realistic. I wouldn't want to avoid a trigger for my child because inevitably that trigger is going to show up at some point. So we really need to work on understanding our learning history. We'll get into mine, understanding what our triggers might be, and then as with our children, like behavior exists across the ages, we need to talk about replacement behavior and what exactly does that look like. And yes, we will touch on coping strategies. We're also going to talk about repair, how to model repair, how to teach repair, all of that good stuff. So I'm going to get into many stories about my flaws. Okay, so I'm going to start with a little bit of a backstory because learning history, learning environment matters. When I was a child, my dad played old man soccer. And so I don't know, it was an over 40, over 50, whatever league it was. And he played old man soccer every Sunday. And in my mind, it probably wasn't, but in my mind, every Sunday morning, there was big emotions. Basically, my dad could never find his uniform. And so it was like everybody's looking through their drawers and where are his socks? And did you take his uniform? Is it in the wash? Like all of those sort of things. Now, as a parent, I can say maybe it probably happened a handful of times, but as a kid, it felt like it was every single weekend. And so when I became a parent, I was like, okay, we need to have a system in place for the uniform. Looking back, I'd be very judgy of my parents right now. I was like, why didn't we try something different, right? Like, why didn't we put a system in place? And maybe they did, right? But like sometimes in our minds, it can be like, I was always, and that maybe isn't accurate. So I'll give my parents that out. But uniforms were like such a huge thing in my home. There were 4 of us and my dad played old man soccer. So I put a system in place with my girls. And when we blended families, we put the same system in place with Jerry's kids. And it's really effective. It probably works 95% of the time. Shameless plug. Each kid has a uniform bag. They're just like laundry bags that I buy off of Amazon, and they come in different colors and different sizes. And the kids are responsible when they get home from their sport of taking their uniform off, putting it in the uniform bag and putting it down by the washing machine. I wash the entire uniform in the uniform bag. It's like these mesh laundry bags. You know what? I will put a link to it in the show notes. And they wash it and I dry it, and And then I can take it out, fold it, and hand it to them in their uniforms. Every kid also has a uniform shelf. So like, for example, I'd be like, all right, Lola, here's your uniform, but go put it on your uniform shelf. Part of the reason I use the bags is I was so sick of looking for a rogue sock. I was so sick of looking this year for underwear that fits the cup. So like everything is in the bag. All of your stuff is contained. Anyway, it works beautifully for our family. But last October, I remember this so vividly. Actually, it was September. We decided on top of blending our family to get a puppy. So it was like maybe week 2 or having a week 1 or 2 of having Teeny. Jerry was gone for the day. I think he was at a football game. And so it's just me and the girls. We went to soccer. Great. We met up with my friends. Their kids came over and played. We went out to dinner. Like lovely. We had a great day. But it was a long day and we had a puppy and I was up early. And so at the end of the day, I go into the girls' room and Parker's like, I don't know where my uniform was. Now, in telling the story, logistically, it was in the room. I saw her wear the uniform upstairs. So there's no reason I couldn't have been like, oh, hey, kid, no worries. Let's find it. It's somewhere in here. But I was out of capacity. I was out of capacity and I just like launched into this, like, we need to find it. Like, we have a system for this, a lecture, loud volume, I'm sure. Like I was just, and I knew while I was losing my mind that I was like, the way I am acting is ridiculous. But I like just couldn't reel it in. Now, let's talk about the irony of me putting a uniform system in place because uniforms were a tantrum in my home and then having a tantrum about said uniform system. This is all cyclical. I am breaking no cycles here. So I knew I was being incredibly irrational and we found the uniform. It, was shoved in Lola's drawer. Like not a big deal, but I had such a moment. Like that was such a trigger for me. And partly because we grew up with it being a trigger and I could like literally feel the anxiety. So I want to talk about this for a second, is the other part of this. So I apologized in the moment. I also did explain that like I was overwhelmed. It'd been a long day. I was tired. And I did make it a point to say those are not excuses. But that is partly why I wasn't able to, act calmer in that moment. And so I go to bed. And one of the biggest things I have learned as a parent is my kids can bounce back from a tantrum, a meltdown, anything they have really, really quickly. And I'm like unable to move on from it, whether that's my kid having strong emotions or myself. So like I lay in bed and I beat myself up. I feel so guilty. I feel embarrassed. I feel like, why was I so ridiculous? I knew where it was. Like it had to be in the room. Why couldn't I just approach that calmly? Why didn't I use a strategy of like just walking away and revisiting it? Like, why couldn't I get my act together? If you see those memes on Instagram, I was one of those, like, I'm supposed to teach my child about emotional regulation. Like, am I emotionally regulated? And I just felt disappointed. I felt incredibly disappointed in myself. And so when this happens, I usually end up writing my girls either a note or writing in their journals. And when I write them a note or in their journals, I am owning my behavior, apologizing for my behavior, and this is the biggest part, talking about the specific strategy I'm going to try to use next time. I'm not totally sure why I go to that. My poor dad, hopefully he doesn't listen to this episode because I'm just going to run him over with the bus. My dad, I don't think is a very good apologizer. I don't think that he ever sort of apologizes. I don't think he apologizes as an adult. And so I think it's so important to me that not only do I apologize, but like that I show the girls that effort, right? My girls keep their journals. Like you can see that like I was not a perfect parent by any means, but that when I did lose it, like I'm going to make an effort to make it better. We were talking with my daughter about the adults in her life, and I'm working on my daughters advocating for themselves and saying if I hurt their feelings or if anybody hurts their feelings or whatever. And we were talking about different adults, and I was asking my daughter, well, you tell me when I hurt your feelings, you're really great about telling me that. And I asked her why. And she said, because I know you'll work on it and change. So that moment of repair, whatever that looks like, ownership on my end. And it's super important. We have an episode on this, name without blame, not saying I lost my mind, but you should have put it in the uniform bag, but you should have been better. I am responsible for my own behavior. And I talk to the girls about this as well. Lola has some anxiety. This morning, for example, the dog was running and I go, Lola, she goes, well, I don't want them to go outside because I'm nervous the dog is going to go outside. And I said, that is your anxiety and nobody else is responsible for managing your anxiety. So what do? Okay, we need the dog to sit in a designated spot and we need to practice that so that you feel less anxious. So same thing here. I am responsible for my behavior. Nobody is responsible for altering the environment to my triggers. Nobody is responsible for, seeing my precursors and adjusting. I am responsible. My children are responsible, and we are going to teach what to do. So to that point, though, I did grow up in a yelling household. I did. And that is a hard thing to break because it becomes your go-to. I'm going to have my sister on in an episode. I won't speak for her, but it is something she and I talk a lot about. It's like, what did behavior modification look like in your home as a kid? And how is that deeply ingrained? And some of this you don't realize until for me, you get married or you have a partner who has a different familial style. And then there's an embarrassment on top of it because you're like, oh my God, why did I do that? Now, anecdotally speaking, I don't have real data. I feel like I lose my mind far less than my dad did, but I know it still happens. And so, while you would be like, yeah, well, Grandpa used to lose his mind, 3 times a week. That doesn't matter, right? I still need to own my behavior and talk about what that looks like moving forward. Okay, so back to the soccer example. So Parker lost her uniform. I didn't have capacity, whatever. The next day, we were at another soccer game, and Parker was wearing my hat. And she came over to me and was like, I lost your hat. I'm really sorry. And she was nervous. And I was like, you know what? It's here somewhere. You wore it out here. We've only been on this field. It's here somewhere. So let's talk about all the factors at play with like my emotional regulation in that incident, which was incredibly similar to the uniform. Literally 12 hours later, very similar, like it's here somewhere, and I didn't lose my mind. Well, I'm going to be honest, we were in public, right? Let's not act like that does not play a huge role. Also, I wasn't that upset about it because I did know that it was somewhere. What I felt disappointed in myself was like, why couldn't I have been that calm the night before? And so I was like, hey, it's somewhere. Like, let's just look around. You're rolling down the hill. And she went and she found it in 30 seconds. I was like, okay, great, Mom, I found it. And I didn't crush my child's soul by yelling at them for an honest mistake. I didn't have to beat myself up all day because I didn't lose, because I lost my cool. So like same child, same problem, different antecedents, different response. This was me, right? I responded differently. I wasn't a different person, but there were different environmental factors. So what do we do about this? This is a really important part. Along with our emotional regulation is like noticing how our kids respond. And one of the biggest things for me is I don't want my kids to be scared of me. Now, I know when I do reach my threshold and I do lose my mind, I'm a little scary. Like anybody yelling isn't cool. And so when I start to see my kids doing that, that's what really pushes me to continue to work on this. So for example, this time I didn't lose my mind, but we were in our house and we were making pizza and Lola was trying to open the jar of sauce. And I was like, hey, I'll just do it in 1 second. I don't know. I was finishing something. Well, she couldn't wait and she opened it herself and she dropped it and there was sauce everywhere. And Lola looked at me, it's like, I'm sorry. And I felt terrible, right? I didn't lose my mind in that moment. I was like, whatever, it's spaghetti sauce. We got to clean it up now. Like it is what it is. And I, of course, was frustrated that like, why couldn't you wait a minute? But I didn't launch into that because Lola's reaction of like immediately apologizing, I knew that I had somewhat conditioned, that I probably would have said, like, you just couldn't wait. And when I say emotional dysregulation, it doesn't always mean literally screaming. I can be a lecture queen and I can be like, why didn't you just wait? And my daughter has ADHD and can be a bit impulsive and she doesn't even know the answer to that. So my begging this question that is redundant doesn't help. So in that moment, I just switched gears and I was like, okay, we have to clean it up. So let's get some paper towels. First we need the paper towels, then we need to mop. And we can start to talk about what that looks like in those moments. And this might be a little controversial. I do talk to my kids about that at the end of the night. I do try to say to them, hey, I noticed when you had a really tough moment and you stayed calm, and I'm so proud of that. And then I also do it for myself. I said, hey, like, I did a pretty good job with the spaghetti sauce, didn't I? Because I want them to recognize those patterns and recognize when people are trying. I want them to see continued effort. So along those lines is the 5-minute rule. So when I was a kid growing up, my parents implemented this thing called a 5-minute rule. I have a very in-depth podcast about it. I'm just going to talk about it briefly here as it ties into emotional regulation. But if you want to learn more about it, please check out that podcast episode. So the premise of the 5-minute rule was that we as kids could ask for 5 minutes at any time, and it invited a calm conversation. Now you can imagine how the comments go on my Instagram when I post about this. They're like, shouldn't you always be calm? Yeah, sure, I should. I should always be calm, but I'm not. And so when my kids have something big to tell me, and usually it's like maybe they broke something, maybe they screwed up, they can ask for 5 minutes. The other day, it was Lola's birthday, and she had gotten this cool paint set from my mom. And I was like, hey, we're not going to do this tonight, okay? We're going to do it tomorrow. So Lola knocks on my door 10 minutes later. I was in my room and she was like, I need 5 minutes. And I was like, okay. She was like, I know you told me not to use the paints, but I did use the paints. And it was like this thing where you like push it and the paints like spread across the paper. And she's like, and I got it all over the room and they're all over my new pajamas. And like, I'm so sorry. And you told me to wait. And I was like, okay. And here's the thing, like, and this is the worst part for me, is that clearly I respond intermittently, meaning sometimes I'm cool, calm, and collected. Sometimes I lecture. Sometimes I get really upset. And that stinks because that means they don't know what to expect. So in that moment, Lola was already beating herself up and she asked for 5 minutes, so that it told me, okay, I need to come at this calm because she's going to tell me she screwed up, and we want our kids to tell us they screwed up. And so I was like, okay. So we just switched gears and we cleaned up, and she already knew. She already knew. She went and like did something she wasn't supposed to. Like, she already knew my lecture wasn't going to help in that moment. So instead we just outlined, hey, this is really an outside activity because it's paint. And I'm sure that we can save the brand new jammies. And was I upset? Sure, I was upset. Do I also know that it was like 8 p.m. at night and she has ADHD and it was an impulsive thought? Mm-hmm. Am I so proud that she like recognized she did that? And she goes, I knew you told me not to and I did it anyway. Yes, my kids are going to make mistakes. That's what happens. Along those lines, I have another story. So Parker the other day asked for a haircut, and she asked for a haircut, and I was like, sure, like I'll look it up. I don't think we can go today, but I will like make an appointment at the salon. No problem. And we were like hanging out that night, and the girls were dancing. I was making them do a dance show, whatever. And Parker comes down. She's like, my hair is feeling so light. And I look at her and I'm like, did you just cut your own hair? And she was like, yeah. And I stayed calm. Like, I didn't lose it emotional regulation, like meaning screaming or anything like that. I stayed calm, but I was like, I'm going to walk away for a minute because I feel really disappointed right now. So in terms of behavior term, the function of Parker's behavior is access. She wanted access to the haircut. Where it gets difficult as a parent is, I gave you access. I said no problem. I said I would make the appointment. And like, it just wasn't soon enough. I wanted it and I wanted it now. And access maintained behaviors are really tricky in that capacity, because the way that we address access maintained behaviors is to give more access. It's to say yes more often. But I said yes, but it was delayed. It just wasn't immediate enough. And I felt really frustrated and disappointed. And so that night I didn't lose my mind in terms of yelling, but I did lecture, which is just not helpful. What is the function of my behavior? The function of my behavior is their attention. The function of my behavior is to escape their behavior, that if I lecture the right amount, if I tell them the right amount of things, that this will stop. And that's not realistic. It's not happening, right? Perhaps there was an attention-seeking component to her behavior, in which case she got a lot of attention. But we have to walk this fine line of like, we also do need there to be parameters. Being emotionally regulated does not mean that there are not consequences. It does not mean that we don't say like, that was the wrong choice and, you know, now it's no longer a choice. It gets really tricky. Being a parent is tricky. Okay. So even if I did everything right, like I followed behavior analytic terms, it was access-based, I gave her access, like I did all of that, and it still didn't work quick enough. So this is where things get really dicey. In terms of what we do next, when you as a parent are talking about emotional regulation, I want us to look for patterns. You are going to, if you're anything like me, if you are one of those super regulated people, I have a lot to learn from you. But as a parent, especially with the more kids you have, there are going to be really frustrating moments. This is also not popular to say as a parenting expert. If you're listening to this, I'm putting expert in quotes because it feels weird. Our kids can be very annoying. They can be rude. They can be defiant. Those are my personal triggers. You tell me entitled, that's another one. So there are things in our learning history, in our parenting style that are just triggers for us. And our kids are very, very intelligent and they know those triggers. Or they're just being themselves, or they're testing boundaries or whatever. And so you're going to occasionally lose your mind. My kids were sitting in the backseat just giggling excessively. And I was like, oh, there's other people in the car. Can you please stop? Whatever. Ridiculous. I didn't yell, but I just mean there are things that happen there. And what I want to look for is patterns. If I get upset about one thing one day, I should try not to beat myself up about it. But if I notice that like the uniform is becoming a trigger and I'm losing my mind every single time we have to take off a uniform, if I notice that like when I'm tired, my capacity is low and I'm yelling more, I need to look for those patterns because I need to understand the antecedents in order to change my own behavior, right? And so we can talk about what that is. Is that coping skills? Is that deep breaths? Is that taking space? One of the things it is for me is naming it for my kids. I know that I lose emotional regulation when I'm overstimulated. The irony being I'm also the person who puts on the music and is cooking with the fan on and all of those things. You know, overstimulation, can happen randomly. It could be something I enjoy and then it gets to be too much. So one of the things I have started to say to my kids is like, I recognize this about myself, so I'm going to tell you when I'm starting to get overstimulated. And then that's on me to alter the environment. So a lot of times, like we'll be making pizza. So the oven will be on. Our oven fan is so loud. I always have the music on. The dog starts barking. The kids start telling me a story at the same time while the music's on. So one of the things I'm working on, and I tell them I'm working on, it's like, I'm overstimulated. Let's turn the music off and let's like revisit, let's let the dog out. And then let's revisit the conversation. So recognizing what those triggers are for you. Also, I want us to work on communicating that to our kids and also helping them to find their own triggers in the moment. So like I said this morning with Lola's anxiety, last night the kids were like extra punchy. And, you know, the way that I beat myself up, my daughter does that too. So I was like, have you noticed like you're being very harsh with Parker? And she was like, I don't know why I do it. And so helping them, I said, hey, some of the things that I notice is when you're really tired, your ability to like process how you're feeling and communicate it lessens. I've noticed that like if it's late at night and your meds have completely worn off, it lessens. So what do we do with that information? Can I start to tell you, hey, it seems like you might be a little tired. Why don't you take some space? Hey, why don't you communicate your needs? One of the biggest things amongst my children with emotional dysregulation is not responding. So ignoring each other, or they're so engrossed in something. And I am guilty of this as well. I'm like, can you please respond to me? So working on that being the expectation, and the way that you have to do that is work on that in calm moments. In order for it to be effective when you're overstimulated, when you're losing your mind, you have to work on it when you're not. So last night I like regrouped. I was pretty regulated and I was like, hey girls. And so then I also maybe be a little less lazy. Like, and I walked over to the room they were in. I was like, I need you both to look at me. What I need you to do right now is, I don't know, like put the dishes away, whatever it was that I was asking to do. So I know that I get triggered when they don't respond to me. I also know that they hyperfocus when the TV is on. So I need to move my body, or I need to come up with a code word, or whatever that might look like to help them recognize that I need something from them in this moment. In terms of repair, I cannot tell you guys how effective it is to have these conversations with your kids. And one of the things I want to caution you on is only having the conversations when they're bad. Only being like, we should have done this and this differently even about yourself. If we are only focusing on every time you don't lose it, then we're not highlighting the progress that we've made. One of the things I think a lot about is our kids. And sometimes, you'll get an email home from a teacher or like they had a really bad day. And that's not totally true, right? They had a bad recess. Recess didn't go great. Okay, well, recess was probably 5% of the day. That same premise applies to us as parents. Like, I go to bed beating myself up. Last week, when I got mad about the haircut, can I tell you what our whole day was? We had gone to the beach. We had gone shopping. We had gone and gotten Marley birthday presents. We had made a fun lunch. Like, we had a great day. And I lost my mind. Now, I'm not going to act like my kids are never going to remember that I lost my mind, but they're probably going to remember the super fun day we had a little bit more than that. And so what percentage of the day was difficult? Maybe 5%, maybe 2%. And so let's focus on the fact that like 95% of the day was really good. That is what I would say to my kids if they were struggling with behavior. Like, hey, you had a bad moment. You didn't have a bad day. Model that for yourself. So the next day I said to my kids, like, I had a really bad moment last night. I'm really sorry about that. But I think I did a really good job when I got frustrated these 3 times. What do you guys think? If your kids are older, Lola's age, for example, ask for feedback. How did I do there? What could I have done better? One of the things I ask my kids a lot is like, what do you need from me in that moment? And they don't always have the answer. So maybe providing some controlled choices. Hey, would it be helpful if I like gave you a few minutes? Would it be helpful if I like gave you a code word? What do you need from me in that moment to be successful? Ultimately, you are going to lose your mind. And let's not make that our go-to. Let's not be like, well, I lost my mind, moving on, right? Let's look for those patterns. My sister and I started a shared document where we keep track of the days that we are calmer. She's coming over. She lives in England now. She's coming over this month, and we're going to define that a little bit better. But basically, she will message me sometimes and be like, today I lost it, man. I lost it. And also, though, part of the data every day we have emojis that we rate our day. And there are so many smiley faces. There are so many moments that we do something really good. And I will message her and be like, listen, I handled this so well and I feel really proud of myself. I stayed calm. I offered choices. Start to find your community. It can be me. Join my club and you can tell me, because I want you to focus on all the times you do it right, because it's significantly more. Now, I'm not saying sweep the times you screw up under the rug. Let's look for patterns. Let's work on replacement behavior. Let's work on repair and modeling repair for your kids. And let's try to move forward and don't beat yourself up too much about it and look for less and less over time. We hold ourselves to a higher standard than our children, and that is incredibly tough. Okay, so thank you so much for listening. This was all about parent emotional regulation. Next week, we are going to talk about child emotional regulation, what that looks like. We are going to continue to talk about coping strategies. And a lot of questions I get is like, we talk about these, my kids won't do any of them. So how to find the right coping strategy for your kid. I think I'm going to have the girls on at some point to talk about what that looks like for them and what each of them are working on. And then my sister is going to come on and we are going to talk about our data amongst the two of us, how we are measuring our success and how we're holding each other accountable for actively working on those skills. So thank you so much for joining the Behavior Blueprint podcast today. Listen, I know I am a broken record, but if you could please rate, review, subscribe, that means so much. It really helps other parents access this podcast. I'm just a little baby podcast. We're growing, and your support really, really means so much to me. And then the last plug is the club. If you want to join the club, if you don't have a village where you can be like, I lost my mind today, how do I work on this? Please join the club. We talk about all of this and much, much more. You can ask questions. I'm on there every day. I can answer your questions. We do coffee talks. We have a little community. So if you are looking for a village, please come join our village. You can find out more information on thefamilybehaviorist.com. All right, see you next week.
If this podcast has helped you even a little bit, leaving a review is one of the biggest ways that you can help me. It helps other parents find the show, and honestly, it helps me know what's landing for you. You can do it right now while you're listening. I would really appreciate it. For information on topics like this and many more, come back to this podcast, The Behavior Blueprint Weekly, and you can always check out my content on Instagram and TikTok at The Family Behaviorist. Thanks so much.